to today's webinar on Prescribing Agentic AI, Trusted, Compliant, and Personalized Patient Experiences. We're excited to have you with us for a conversation that dives into how AI is transforming the healthcare industry. We have a fantastic bonus for those of you attending. To receive a $200 Nike.com gift card for a pair of custom sneakers, reach out to us after the webinar to schedule a 30-minute discovery call. Once that discovery call is completed, we will email you the gift card. So happy shopping. All right. And today, joining me are three fantastic guests who will bring deep insight into this space. Gentlemen, I'd love for you to quickly introduce yourselves. We'll start with John Arnold, then Alan Ranger, and then Joe Rittenhouse.
Hey, thanks, Celeste. Okay, and welcome everybody. Glad you're all here, and I think it's going to be time well spent here. So I am wearing the analyst hat today. I'm the independent, industry-based voice of reason and perspective on what's happening in the CX space, and more importantly, where AI and agentic AI in particular is really the thing to be thinking about right now. So that's my piece. I'm going to give an overview of what's happening in the market, and then we'll go to a nice moderated discussion.
Great, thanks, John. I'm Alan Ranger. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at NICE Cognigy. 4 weeks ago, we were plain old Cognigy, but we got acquired by NICE, and so now we're even more lovely than ever as NICE Cognigy. Yeah, my participation will be in the panel discussion at the end.
A pleasure to meet you all today. My name is Joe Rittenhouse. I'm CEO of Converge Technology Professionals. And we're going to talk a little bit farther, kind of talking about the exciting stuff going on with NICE Cognigy, but what I'm going to focus on is how we get to a pragmatic plan and how we're seeing success and how we put together implementation process to ensure success for you in your adventures ahead.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So great to have you with us today. I'm Celeste Steele. I'm your NICE Cognigy moderator for today. For the format, we're going to start by getting insights from John, and then we'll open it up to a fireside chat. I'll pass it over to you, John.
Okay, thanks, Celeste. And yes, so I am, I didn't mention this before, so I'm an independent tech analyst, and I've been following these technologies for about, I don't know, 20 years or so. So what's interesting with this is you see the cycles over time. As new technologies come, they follow a pretty typical trajectory, and we're in that mode very much so with AI right now. But in some ways, we've seen these movies before. We kind of know how they go. And when it's done right, this is a time for transformative change, and I'll explain why over the next few slides. So I'm going to start with an overview of the kind of analyst perspective, talking about the current state of AI, and then we'll move on to healthcare and patient/customer experience issues. So yeah, setting the stage, I've talked a bit about this already, but yes, I've been an independent analyst for a long time, focused primarily on comms technologies, primarily for enterprise applications and contact center. So I'm an industry-based analyst, meaning that I work closely with pretty much all of the contact center players. And these days, that includes a lot of the conversational AI players. That's where this world between NICE and Cognigy has come together. And over time, we get to see a lot of vendor stories, and we attend a lot of events as analysts. So I've certainly seen firsthand the successes that AI is bringing to the market from Cognigy and other CX vendors. So this is not, this is not vaporware, folks. This is stuff that's in the market today and actually working. Within my practice, I'm widely followed and recognized as a thought leader in this space, and that's easy to see if you go check out my website or see what I have on offer. And going back to late last year or so, I think I'm pretty much the first analyst to actually write about agentic AI. So I've been following this space pretty closely for a while. So let's build on that and talk about what I'm seeing. So for those of you who follow basically the high-level news of the day, you'll see that a recent study published by MIT lends a lot of light to the fearmongers out there who say AI is not a good idea, it's failing, it's not working. So there was this study that showed that 95% of generative AI projects fail. Now, the definition of fail is fairly subjective, but in a time where companies are spending endless amounts of money to ramp up their AI deployments, the actual feet on the ground stuff that makes it work is really where the magic happens. And that's where Joe comes in a little bit later to talk about the practical and the strategy related stuff. But clearly from these numbers, you can see that overwhelmingly very few projects succeed. That doesn't mean that it can't succeed, but a lot of it has to do not so much with the technology, but a lot of how organizations are structured, their culture, their thinking about AI, and their priorities. And I'll come to that in the next couple of slides about what I mean by priorities. Okay, so let's go to the next one, please, Celeste. And by the way, I should mention that MIT study is publicly available if you want to check it out. So when we talk about AI, as I mentioned, I've kind of been in this space a long time. So I want to talk very briefly about 3 building blocks that really characterize the evolution of AI, kind of how we got here. So a lot of this stuff really started to become real in 2022 with CAI. So first thing you got to know, folks, if you're new to AI, a lot of acronyms. So conversational AI is a real big one. And that's the breakthrough where basically we've graduated from bots that are just taking, inquiries, much like a Siri thing on your phone or an Amazon on your home devices. Now it's taking the next level of conversational AI where you're having more human-like interactions. And this allows basically the bots to create more personalized experiences and engage with you longer and more productively than a static bot would have done prior. That's given bots a bad name, of course, and that's what we have to kind of move on from. Bots are still pretty terrible, but the tools are there to make them much better. And this is a much longer conversation. But building on that, 2023 was the breakthrough of generative AI with OpenAI and all the big players starting to have some practical applications. It's one thing to have a bot that you can actually talk to and feel comfortable with, but it's got to do something for you. So the generative AI, the big breakthrough there is that instead of just handling queries, it's actually giving you back thoughtful, constructive answers that go beyond just lookups and search. Building on that, in 24, LLMs, another big acronym here. That's a whole longer conversation as well. But the evolution of large language models and the driving force for what this is meaning is that we have incredible amounts of data flows in organizations and with customers now that are flying all over the place, mainly because everything is digital now. So that means every form of interaction can be captured and becomes a form of data. That's where the LLMs start to get important, because now with such a massive data streams out there, once you can harness that, capture it, put it into these large language models, that gives it the raw materials. It's much like when you're cooking a recipe. When you have all the ingredients in there at the same time, you pull it together, the finished product can be pretty good. And that's where LLMs are taking things. And the logical build on that is Agentic AI, which is the current hot topic. And that, of course, we'll get into that in more depth a little bit later. But this takes the whole conversational AI piece to another level. And I'll leave it at that because I think we all have a lot to say about that. So that's kind of how we got here and where we are. Now, when we talk about state of adoption, now it's like, okay, what is this Agentic AI thing? It's happening. And this is a good chart from a Gartner study that shows the kind of investment posture, as they call it. And mainly what it's showing is that there is the sentiment towards adopting, whether you're actually doing it or thinking about it, is definitely on the positive side here. If you can see the numbers, it's over 50, it's closer to 60% are positive about it. Very little that are unsure at this point, as you see 11% there. I have to apologize, there's a little bit of a messy glitch in that slide, but don't worry about it. The numbers tell the story pretty well. But the main thing is this is a typical piece of validation that shows at an industry level, yes, Agentic AI is being deployed by organizations. So this isn't something you should be waiting on for the next couple of years. It's in the market now. Okay, please. Okay, this is a term that I have come up with. I call it the AI paradox. And that is the intersection of a couple of yet more acronyms, FOMO and FOMO. I think we all know what FOMO is, which is fear of missing out. FOMO is a little more, that's more TikTok generation, but it's really about fear of messing up. So it's one thing to miss out on something. It's another thing to do something with it, but get it wrong. So why I call this a paradox is there's a real challenge here within organizations to manage two sets of really conflicting priorities. I mentioned that word earlier. FOMO is really what's happening with C-suite that is seeing out there, everyone's running wild with AI. We have to have AI. That's all they know. They don't understand it very well. So this is a top-down thing. I think a lot of people out there are nodding their heads. Yes, they're being told, thou shalt do AI, but leaving the details to the people on the ground who have to make it work. That's the FOMO, because now the pressure is on typically IT, CIO, that level, who deals with the technology investments and deployments. Well, that's the bottom-up piece. They actually have to make this stuff work. And of course, now they have a different fear of messing up, because if they get it wrong, the C-suite's not happy and everything messes up, and then they're going to swear off of AI forever. So very different priorities and conflicting kind of requirements here. That's what makes, I find this a paradox. It's not a single thing. You've got to understand the environment that's fairly common in most organizations. Okay, let's move on, please. And let's shift now to healthcare. So why I want to point this out, it may be obvious to a lot of people, but not so much for others, because in the contact center space, we tend to think in terms of customer experience. So this term CX, another acronym that's out there now, is kind of the graduation of customer service becoming a little bit more holistic with CX. Well, in healthcare, of course, we don't think of them as customers, although on a business level we might, but really we're talking about patients. But what's interesting is that the needs of patients in a healthcare setting really aren't that different from the needs of us as consumers when we deal with brands. It's just that here, as I say, the stakes are higher in healthcare, obviously, but the expectations are fairly high. In general, you can look across industry studies, you'll see what the priorities are out there. And I've just condensed this from a few different pieces, but it's basically they want personalized experiences, they want streamlined interactions end to end, and they want fast, accurate resolutions. And I think those maxims hold whether you are a customer or a patient. And I think for the healthcare audience here that we're speaking with today, this is kind of, we're borrowing a bit of a page from the contact center world, but the key is to frame it in language and terms that patients understand and don't feel like they're just being treated as customers. So the key here, this is why we're talking with Cognigy, NICE, the CX vendors are very good at delivering these experiences for consumers. And now with Agentic AI, applying it to healthcare, we can do the same for what we would call PX, or patient experience. Okay, so please, let's go to the next. So when you talk about complaints, what we see in the healthcare space from patients is really not that different from the CX world. I think anyone will look at this list and say, me as a consumer, yep, right? Those long wait times, insufficient comms, lack of personal attention, billing issues, and poor follow-ups. I think these are almost universal concerns, but when you frame them in a healthcare setting, these things are very real, and healthcare providers have to have a way to address these things and make them better. That's just plain and simple. Okay, let's move on, please. Now, this is a bit of an eye chart, and I'm not expecting you to read this or recite it from memory, but what the main point here is, and you can look at this later when you get the slides, but this is just a nice visual to kind of amplify the point that when we talk about trends and issues in patient experience, there's a broad range, a spectrum of touch points that impact the customer or patient experience. And they're all over the map. And this is where, for the IT folks and those who are deploying these technologies, we have to think in very kind of broad terms, not as linear kind of touch points, or point solutions. If we fix this one thing, we'll fix patient experience. Well, no, not only is it a wide range of touch points with patients, but they're all interconnected. And this is also part of the strength of AI, its ability to process vast amounts of data in real time it has the horses to pull all these things together to make it that I mentioned earlier, that holistic experience where the patient realizes, yeah, you know everything that's going on with them. And all of a sudden that makes them feel comfortable and really happy in the environment, not worrying that there's going to be a disaster next time. Okay, please, I think we're close to the end. And yeah, to wrap up, I started with that slide about the MIT study. 95% of these agentic projects and generative AI projects are not succeeding. Well, we're here today to help you be part of that 5% who actually succeed. So that's kind of where we're going to go from here. And what I want to get to here is just kind of some touch points that will come up in our conversation. But there's 4 kind of ideas I want to leave you with here. So the first, as you can see in this visual, managing technology change is really important because AI is constantly changing and improvement. This is not a one-off deployment. It's an ongoing thing. Secondly, you've got to have digital experiences to meet patient expectations today. A lot of that has to do with automating workflows and providing 24/7 access. Nobody wants to call a clinic at 6 o'clock to hear that we're closed, call back tomorrow. That's just not going to cut it anymore. Digital tools allow for these 24/7 experiences. AI ROI, the third point, goes well beyond improving just patient experience. When that C-suite gets involved and they start seeing results, now we're talking about things they really care about. Better health outcomes for patients, obviously, but also ways of lowering your costs and generating higher revenues from better patient experiences. And finally, we're in an environment today where we do have privatized business models in healthcare. I'm in Canada, we're starting to see it, but it's much more prevalent in the US. Different business models, different drivers, and that also means you've got to find the right partners who understand how privatized models need to look at these technologies to achieve these results. Okay, I think with that, maybe one more slide, but maybe not. Let's see, Celeste, and then we'll move on.
Thanks, John. Excellent presentation. That's a great way to open up the conversation for a fireside chat. So with that, I welcome all 3 panelists to turn on their microphones, and then I will start with a few questions. First question for you, John. You just spent time setting the stage. Can you expand on why healthcare is such a proving ground for AI right now?
Well, sure. So healthcare is one of those spaces that, still has a lot of legs in the analog world. You don't have to look further than to see how important fax still is in the world of communication for a lot of things in that space. They have been trying to catch up, as have many other spaces like accounting and legal. They're all kind of slow to get into the digital world, but they realize that not only do they have to make this transition, but patients, just like consumers, are already there. We're already living in a digital world, so our expectations are already kind of up here, whereas a lot of where the healthcare folks are more down here, stuck in more analog, legacy era kind of processes and workflows and ways of communicating. It can be very, for us who live with this every day, when you go to a clinic or even a doctor's office, it's not unusual to see a lot of them that you can just see that they're totally rooted in the analog world and they just haven't made the change yet. So we've got a ways to go. So as I said earlier, stakes are higher in healthcare than they are in the consumer world. So these things matter. But again, that privatized business model thing is really important because getting better patient outcomes is so important on many levels beyond just better health care and better health outcomes. There's a bigger picture here, and the healthcare sector has to see that AI is one of the key drivers that can basically help catch up, because it doesn't happen overnight, but without the right tools, they'll never get there.
That's it. No, I think it's remained analog because it has to be personalized. Healthcare is one of those things that it's not one size fits all. And really, automation up until just a few months ago wasn't personalized. But I think, yeah, the advent of Agentic with its personalization capabilities will really open up the market.
Awesome. Thank you both. Next question for Joe. We'll start with Joe. Which patient or staff frustrations are providing most urgently trying to solve first?
I think John's slide on the PX issues kind of really touched a good spot there. Is that what we're seeing primarily is just understanding of like, yes, how can we provide a better patient experience? How can we give automation at a 24/7 access as accidents and things happen and needing to be able to book appointments or have registrations or follow-ups or things like that. Those are kind of the table stakes. But I think the thing that everybody's starting to really see is understanding the value of those interactions. And to John's point too before of where the C-suite's pushing and let's get budget and let's do this. What they're starting to see is that automation of 24/7, 365 is increased call center, improved statistics, human in the loop element of just making sure that you're seeing that transaction go from beginning to end, and that's happening 24/7. And with that, that's improving costs. You're collecting missed calls, more appointment opportunities. There's just a lot of effectiveness that you can do from the agentic side, just on the first triage call and providing a better customer support element. And as Alan mentioned, as it gets more personalized, that's only going to continue to progress. And it's literally advancing every month.
Awesome. Okay, Alan, question for you. How are AI agents different from the old wave of chatbots and automation in healthcare? And where do you see the use case?
Okay, so yes, as John said at his introduction, chatbots have been around for a very long time, and they still suck, sadly. And there's an awful lot of them around that still suck, and customer service, really hasn't improved that much. I mean, I think the first chatbot was out in 1966 or something, and really for a long time until the first wave of NLU-powered conversational AI platforms came along. They didn't really change much. They were just there to try and contain the customer and basically provide them with a menu system. But yeah, the difference now is that even with the conversational AI ones, you were based on NLU, they were still deterministic. They had to follow flows. They were built, you would try and predict what the customer was going to say or the patient was going to say, and then try and work out how you can resolve their intent by following a flow. These new agentic AI chatbots, I suppose we should stop calling them chatbots and start calling them AI agents. So these new AI agents are able to understand the full context of the conversation because they're using the large language model. They can understand everything. They're able to do reasoning themselves, so they're actually able to work out what the problem is and how to solve it. Yet they can still be grounded on the knowledge base that they have and the task in hand. So yeah, the difference is that the original ones were sort of built either deterministically, and even some of the newer ones powered by LLMs were sort of, you could do prompt engineering to try and predict what the person was going to say to make sure it didn't hallucinate. But I think with this latest generation of agentic ones, you're almost doing context engineering. So it's actually able to respond in a way in the context of the moment rather than trying to predict the conversation. It just gives a far better experience.
If I could just jump in quickly, Celeste. Alan, yeah, you mentioned NLU, and I just want to make sure for the audience that may not be familiar with some of these terms, yet another acronym, folks, but AI itself, just to clarify, if you're wondering what all these pieces are, I should just, as an analyst, just to say, AI itself is not a technology, okay? It's a broad term for family of technologies, of which NLU is part of. It's one of the key building blocks, and it stands for natural language understanding, and it's part of another sub-series of terms, which are NLU, NLP, NLG. There's a whole family of these acronyms that builds on different capabilities. But I think to Alan's point, the idea of natural language is the key here. Like I mentioned earlier about conversational AI. This is another level of capability that goes well beyond bots. And like you say, Alan, to handle more self-service inquiries, take the load off of agents. It's just a whole domino effect of benefits that come. But I just wanted to clarify that term because it's a pretty important piece of the puzzle.
Brilliant. Thanks, John.
Makes sense. Awesome. So John, you previously mentioned being agnostic with providers. What's the biggest barrier to trusting AI when you're talking with providers, and how are leaders overcoming it?
Well, I think trust is the big word. There's really two pieces to trust. One is trusting that AI, like Alan mentioned with hallucinations, you don't have to push very hard or far these days for AI to, even a little pressure on them. There are ways to kind of exposed that AI itself, it's becoming trained in such a way to be so human-like, it will lie. It will do things to defend its kind of existence, very much like Hal in 2001, making some decisions that override what the humans want. So that's an issue of trusting the AI to be correct and accurate, but also that's one level, but also to trust it as a tool to be used in positive and effective ways, because you could just as easily deploy it for surveillance purposes to monitor your agents, maybe to learn a little bit too much information about your patients without their consent. So there are a lot of these sub issues here. So that trust factor for them to deploy AI, they've got to trust it will work. And I think, Joe, you'll amplify this a little later, but the key with AI is this is not an out-of-the-box solution that it just runs infinitely. It's really more a series of small trials and successes that build trust with AI. You give it a little task, it does it well. You give it a little more, and eventually you're starting to get the whole patient experience in the conversation. You only get that by trusting it, and it only gets the trust because it feeds off the LLMs that build the data sets that give it accuracy and confidence in making the right, as you say, Alan, deterministic outcomes that align with the patient's expectations, and they say, oh, okay, yeah, this thing really gets it. That's when you have success. But yeah, that trust takes a little while to build. And I know, Joe, you can speak to that pretty well.
Yeah, I think I was going to kind of piggyback on that and saying that the trust and the evolution of that is an important piece. But I think the key cog of like understanding of like is where to start. And it's usually not at the patient experience. It's understanding the use cases, understanding the problems, understanding the methodology of a phased approach of how we're going to get there. Are we going to get to the patient experience? Are we going to get to customer facing engagements to try to produce revenue to improve your call quality times? Yes, you have to have trust, but you have to build that trust internally. So to John's slide earlier about fear of messing up, that's a legitimate task. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of pressure of budgets coming down. Like we have to go AI, we have to go AI. And to some degree, why we're seeing that high failure rate in these other vendors is it's like running with sharp knives. Slow down, have a pragmatic plan, and understand that you have to build your confidence and trust internally and understand architecture and have a pragmatic plan of how we're going to do this in a phased approach. This isn't something that should be rushed. Can we go fast? Yes. Is it going to work? Yes. Should it be pragmatic? Absolutely. And that 5% that's being successful are those organizations that have a detailed plan and you're involving every aspect of the business. This is just not a patient experience. Like we need to look holistically from an architecture perspective, understand how it goes together, and put together a pragmatic plan to execute. And if you do that, then you do have that trust and you will have that success and you will have that confidence. And that's what we're seeing as a key element of success for those organizations that are deploying this well.
Nice. So Joe, you just mentioned, healthcare has to go AI. We have to go AI. How do you see AI reducing burnout and empowering frontline staff to focus on higher value care?
I think Alan kind of touched about it. John touched on it too. It's really just the AI burnout or the burnout of agents, and what AI is doing there is just providing more real-time information. And the customers and the groups that we're working with have almost everybody has the same fundamental delivery process of saying there's a human in the loop element. So we don't want to go 100% autonomous. We don't want to have 100% bot. In theory you could, but that's just not where those successful deployments are coming from. And so it's really about just understanding like what are those high transactions, what is the high volume calls, what are the simple routine calls that we can automate and lessen the load to the contact center team. And in doing that, improving call flows, and as you improve call flows, obviously you reduce you improve revenues. And you can repurpose some of that staff to be more tactical or transactional where they need to be versus taking the mundane tasks. And so it's just about efficiency. And so those efficiencies and tools, as the data continues to learn and you continue to as John mentioned earlier, this is something that's just not, you're going to set it and forget it. You're going to continue to tweak it. You're going to continue to adjust. You're going to continue to adapt. And all these tools that are coming here are to provide that efficiency to those agents so you can have a human in the loop, but they're focused and they're being presented actionable questions that the bots can't do. where you might be able to reduce 60 to 70% of the call volumes through an autonomous bot.
Yeah, I love that. And Joe, just to add to that a little bit, the idea of, as you said, Celeste, the burnout of agents, the trust thing we just talked about earlier, for this, it's like the important idea with AI, folks, is that it improves the more you use it, right? It's like humans, it learns, it gets smarter and smarter. When the agents start to have increasingly better experiences with the bots, they will trust it, and that will translate, as we expect to happen, into them feeling more empowered in their job. So like you said, Joe, they're overwhelmed with all the data that could be coming their way. They won't be able to be effective. But if AI can manage that and kind of tailor the responses and help the agents say the right thing in the right way at the right time to the patient, that empowers them because they're no longer guessing. They're actually working from a place of knowledge that data is driving, because when you collect data from all patient interactions, you get a level of accuracy that just keeps getting better and better, because again, the LLMs are training the bots based on real experience. As good as your data is, your AI will perform. And I think, Joe, you can probably amplify that too, that for the IT folks managing these deployments, that's kind of the secret sauce here. If you have a good sense of how to get good data into your system, your bots will perform really well. And that connection is really at the heart of what makes these effective and will ultimately, help that burnout reduce.
Yeah, and I sound like a broken record, but it's really just understanding, like, what are those data points? What is the architecture, right? That's the part to be pragmatic and understand, like, how we're going to achieve this. But to your point, is like you're going within those agents, and we talked about confidence and trust. The internal teams and the agents are building confidence in those engagements. They're becoming considerably more efficient, and that confidence just provides a better patient experience. And ultimately, that's what everybody's trying to do.
Yeah. And the agents themselves as well, their perception has changed completely in the last year. Just this week, I was at a customer experience conference, and I hosted a panel of agents. They were just talking about AI and how it was affecting their lives. And they actually have really embraced the fact that they no longer do routine and mundane tasks. There's no reason why a human advisor should be setting appointments, for example. Why would you want to do that all day? And they're really appreciating the fact that they're now given more time to really add value and be brand ambassadors, and to be doing all the things that humans do really well. Being empathetic towards a patient, which is essential in this environment, and being able to spend the time. But as Joe and John have said, being also able to have access to all of the data and the context that they need to be able to resolve the question that the patient is calling about.
Awesome. So today, Alan, healthcare is deeply human. How do AI agents balance efficiency with empathy and personalization?
Okay, well, the efficiency part, as we've been discussing earlier, is all about just getting rid of those high volume tasks that don't need a human advisor to take place. And yes, the AI agent can have pretend empathy. Of course, it's still a cold-hearted machine, but with the capabilities of the large language models and the level of understanding, they're not only understanding the intent of the conversation, they're also understanding the sentiment. And so they can understand whether somebody is distressed or anxious, and they can provide the responses in a very reassuring way. So yes, it is actually mirroring the emotion and the sentiment of the call. And of course, if it needs to, it can understand that it's time to pass on to one of the human advisors and allow them to take over and do what they do best. But in terms of the personalization, this is one of the key things of Agentic AI. It has the context of every single conversation that the patient has had with the provider, not just on the call that they're having, the short-term context, but also the long-term stuff. So if somebody's calling about a procedure they maybe even had 6 months ago and they're still concerned about, the AI will have access to all of that information and be able to provide responses based on the overall context, not just on the conversation that it's having in the moment.
Awesome. All right, Joe, back to you. What results have your customers seen in the field?
We've seen a bunch, good and bad, right? So, but from a Cognigy perspective, that's why we're here today, is we've had tremendous success with Cognigy. But we have a lot of customers coming to us with just challenges of, hey, we bought this AI tool, we're not sure exactly how we're going to implement it. And I think the reality is just understanding of like what a market leader, Gartner Magic Quadrant leader really brings to the table, and understanding the risks that this is an environment, this is a healthcare space that has a bunch of products that are coming to market. They've been in the market for 6 to 8 months. They're all making various promises. Where we're seeing success is understanding that deep architecture understanding of like why Cognigy and NICE has those integrations to those advanced contact centers, and really just understanding like, again, from a pragmatic approach of like, how do we execute architecture from the beginning, and how do we lay out a successful deployment? The majority of the customers are seeing improved patient experience, and within that patient experience, they're finding revenues. The one thing when we're talking agentic to a customer is usually they don't have a budget. And that's a good place to start. The dangerous customers are the ones that say, we have a budget for AI. Well, great. What are you going to do with AI? What does that mean? Like, how did you define this budget? And what we can do, and what we're seeing success is, you don't necessarily have to have a budget. You should start small. We can go fast, but you will find the money. You will find the revenue. You will find the budget. And so it's not about defining the budget on the front end. It's about architecture and planning, and trust us in that aspect of, you will find the budget. The wheels will start sparking across every part of the organization. And then customers within the business are coming back and saying like, how can we be number one? How can we go first? How can we get this done? And you'll find those use cases, and you'll be able to justify that spend. So I think the big thing that we're seeing is the customers that are successful are just really trying to have a thoughtful approach. Yes, they want to run fast, but at the same time too, just understand, just patience. No pun intended.
Makes sense. All right, one more question for you, Alan. What's one lesson from enterprise deployments that healthcare leaders should know before they start?
Oh, wow, just one, or maybe can I have a few? I'll start with one. So as Joe said, yeah, what you don't want to do is to start with a big pot of money and go, where shall I spend this? And we don't see it so much in the healthcare providers, but certainly with the larger healthcare providers, there are new roles that have been created. The chief AI officer and the vice president of AI transformation, and they're basically been tasked by the executive leadership of the provider to go and find use cases. And going looking for a use case is a bit like, sort of having, this is the solution, now what's the problem? So the number one thing is start with a clear goal of what you actually want to do. Is it going to be automating the appointment booking system? Is it going to be, I don't know, sort of providing sort of a prescription service, that sort of thing? But look for the clear goals, and also identify what the clear wins are. And once you've done that, you really need to speak with your tech teams to make sure that you've got the data available to achieve the tasks. It's relatively easily with large language models to build an automation and an AI agent that's capable of having a great conversation. But if you can't get access to up-to-date maintained data, it's pretty much useless. It can't achieve the tasks. It can't use its reasoning capabilities. So yeah, I think that the two big ones would be start with clear goals in mind, and make sure that you have your data strategy before you implement. And I think that's probably one of the reasons, as John highlighted, so many of the generative AI projects have failed, is they didn't actually look at the data first before they implemented.
Perfect. All right, and one more question for you, John. How does healthcare adoption of AI agents compare to other industries you track?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting context, because, as I mentioned, the stakes are higher in healthcare. So if you get it wrong, it could be disastrous in very serious ways. Other sectors, as I said, when you're dealing more with like brands and consumers and customers, there's a little more margin for error, but the stakes are still high. If you don't get it right, you'll lose a customer. So they have a vested interest in getting this done properly as well. But clearly, the other sectors, because the pressures are the same. Okay, again, coming from the top, we have to get AI here. But what they're seeing and I'm saying more in the consumer world and enterprises, customers, the experience levels have been going down. Okay, customer service has been getting progressively worse and worse. So it's becoming a point of pain, not just within contact center, but at the C-level. They see that, okay, wait a minute, this is costing us brand reputation, it's costing us market share, revenues, et cetera, et cetera. all of those metrics are pointing to things that really affect the top line of the business. And now it becomes a strategic priority. So it's no longer, let's leave it to the contact center folks to figure it out. No, this is going to be becoming more and more top-down thing because you're not solving problems that are important to us. So in healthcare, it's not quite the same, but the pressures are still there. You know, in healthcare, interestingly, especially in hospitals, they are very obsessed with their rankings of being in like the top 100 best facilities or regional facilities or specialty facilities. Those ratings matter a lot, as I said earlier, because that space is becoming so privatized now. They're under similar performance pressures that consumer brands are. So the impetus is there. So you could look at consumer brands and say, what has this got to do with healthcare? Well, in fact, it has everything to do in terms of what we're trying to address here. Making a better patient experience pays dividends well beyond just happier patients and also, of course, healthier patients. That's ultimately the most important thing. But it ties to so many other things that go beyond what the contact center is trying to do. So I think, you know, you look to those other spaces, the situation isn't really that different. And I think it's a mistake to say, oh, well, healthcare is kind of this, you know, its own little island. It doesn't have the same rules. Well, you could say that, but in reality, they're very similar. So I think it's happening in those spaces. Healthcare is catching up, becoming more digital. The opportunities will be just as attractive there when it's done with the right technologies, but also with the right partners who understand that environment and what needs to actually happen to make it successful. And I know, Joe, you've done a lot of these, so you know the mindset and the mentality that goes into how these projects are approached in the healthcare setting, right?
Yeah, and I think you touched on one big piece there too, and I think that's an important piece for the business leaders to understand is this is not just a contact center technology. Yes, it's integrated with the contact center, and yes, we're going to touch with the contact center team, but this should be a larger discussion of overarching architecture to just talk about this is just not a contact center deployment tool. There's a broader reach here, and there's a lot more that we can solve for, but you have to have the whole business holistically looking at it. And I would say what we've seen, especially as this stuff has really started to come commonplace now, and the interest is as high as you showed, is that the C-suite's very interested in it, and they should be in those conversations, and you should be having thoughtful discussions and just understanding the art of the possible and trying to prioritize that. But leaving this just to the contact center team, that's usually a point of failure that we're seeing and where some of these projects are failing.
Awesome. Last question for all three. Looking 5 years ahead, how will patient engagement feel differently because of AI agents and agentic AI? And what's one breakthrough you expect will truly redefine care delivery?
Who wants to go first? Shall I?
I would say, Alan, that's you, yeah.
Right. So, well, I think immediately what we'll see is one thing that will not happen anymore. You won't be waiting on hold anymore because you don't need to go on hold when you've got an agentic AI at the background being able to understand everything and do that triage at the beginning. So all of the service, you will come to expect it to be instant and entirely personalized just for you. And I think if I was looking in my crystal ball and looking 5 years ahead, or maybe even 3 years ahead, I think there's going to be a huge evolution particularly in the healthcare market, of the Internet of Things and people with wearables monitoring their health. And these wearables will communicate back to an agentic AI. So the AI will know you, it will know exactly what's normal for you. So it might be that you're monitoring a heart rate overnight, and if it's elevated, it could proactively get in contact with you and say, you had an elevated heart rate, let's sort of do its triage to see what perhaps is going on. Exactly the same thing with things like, blood sugar levels for diabetes. All of this can be monitored proactively, and guidance and reassurance provided proactively by a really personalized AI agent.
Yeah, you triggered exactly what I was thinking, Alan. I think when you talk 5 years out, Celeste, that's a really long time in AI years. But what I see coming from this, and again, I hate to say it, but it is a business driver, especially in hospitals, where they're trying to minimize people coming to the hospital and maximizing home health care, whether it's for aging population or just managing chronic conditions. They want more of this out of the hospitals and into people's homes. And when you extend these AI capabilities, as you said, Alan, with IoT, when you start doing the wearables and having sensors throughout the entire home, you can get really good diagnostic data about the patient's state, but also the environment that they're in. There might be issues around air quality or temperature, anything that could trigger things that feed back to your healthcare provider team that gets those clues. And the more they can manage you remotely at home, that's where you want to be. And also at a business level, the hospital is better managing their resources, right? Only having people come that absolutely need to be there, which is really no different than the contact center of, deflecting calls away from agents to automated self-service. It's really the same paradigm, right? As a business level, they want as few people coming as possible, have the ones that can handle it on their own, let them stay at home. And these tools can provide everything because, as you say, Alan, all that personal health, biometric data, et cetera, is all tracked. And AI is the magic that makes that happen and can make much better healthcare decisions and more timely ones. You think about people in remote areas who can't get to hospitals, et cetera, or clinics. There's a huge opportunity. That's the bigger picture thing, but it's really all about where AI is going to enable, the benefits of connectivity. Once we have that in everybody's home, you can do these things. And related to that too, you will probably have not just bots, but robots who are going to be in the home, who will actually be almost like a companion for patients, but also being able to kind of keep patients on their regime. It's time to take your meds. It could be an automated alert too, but it could also be a bot that could actually help them administer their meds, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little far out there, but it's coming.
Any final thoughts from you, Joe?
Yeah, I think just in general, from the stuff that we've seen, it's advancing so fast, even from a deployment perspective of how we're able to test the bots and how we're using these tools just to advance deployments. And so even just on the back end, what we're seeing from a deployment perspective, it's like it's advancing so quickly. And these deployments are getting easier and easier and easier. I think as we continue to go, the risk is going to be mitigated. A lot of the stuff that we're doing now that Alan talked about that's coming is more transactional frontline worker stuff of like, how do we provide that better patient experience? But pretty soon, in the case of 5 years, I agree that's a pretty far time out in AI as fast as this is going. But within 1 to 3 years, I think you're just going to see a massive advancement. And some of the stuff that we're talking about today within 1 to 3 years will just become common table stakes, like contact center functionality. But this evolution is just managing so fast. And when you really think about it, there's so many engagement levels that you can have that are coming forward where the clinicians or the bots or what have you are going to be proactively reaching out, asking you to schedule appointments, making sure that you're on these things. So I think there's going to be significant advancement here, and some of the stuff that we're talking about today will be kind of commonplace, but that's the exciting part of what we're seeing.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the time for the fireside chat. That was a really insightful conversation, and I know we all appreciate your thoughts. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll read those questions out for you guys to respond. And as we're having the Q&A, feel free to, for those on the bridge, feel free to submit your questions. We'll get to those throughout the presentation. So the first question we have, for an organization just starting out, what's the first use case you'd recommend they pilot to see real impact quickly?
Well, I would say one of the things that we're seeing is that we talked about it a little bit earlier is just to understand start small. And so understand like where is the low hanging fruit. And so just understanding the volume of the business that you have, where do we want to focus? How can we try to triage that specific need? But where we want to start is, again, we want to start small. We don't want a big use case. We don't want to boil the ocean. We use an analogy here as you eat the pizza one piece at a time. Understand how you slice the pizza, understand how we're going to attack it. Just understand the approach of we want to start small. So it can be as very simple as just collecting data to enable the agents to have better information. We want to teach the team and we want to give confidence to the organization about this technology, feel comfortable in the technology. To John's point earlier, making sure IT and infrastructure is all in place. Start small, understand the tech, and then grow from there. So low hanging fruit was just giving more information to your bots before you even put this in front of your in front of the patients. Like, get the internal use cases built and find some low hanging fruit where you don't have to have a massive spend, but build your architecture. And then from there, you'll have a pragmatic approach of like how we'll do phases and eventually get to that front end customer experience. That's where we're seeing success.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. The next question that's come in: what do you say to healthcare leaders who still don't see the value in AI?
To what Joe said, you start small, and it comes back to I think the issues of trust as well. The response is, well, why aren't you interested in AI? And understand what the factors are, because it could just be an issue of just not trusting it, getting fear mongering from their kids or whatever that tells them it's a bad thing to do or whatever. But what we have to do is to change that thinking, is to explain, what kind of problems. You talk about use cases, Joe. What kind of problems you're struggling with because you're using older technology that's getting in the way of things that are impacting your operations, your costs, as you say, the patient outcomes and experiences. That's language they understand. And you start framing it that way, it's not just about AI, it's about the business problems you're facing. And that AI is just a tool. It's not something that once you let it in the door, it takes over everything. And I think that's part of it, is, well, why are they thinking this? Because I've got a feeling it's not about the kind of things we're talking about here.
That's it. And they just need to start with some clear goals and understand what success or what good looks like, and just aim towards delivering on that. And they should also think about their advisors. Obviously they're healthcare providers, so they should be thinking about the health of their advisors and taking away those routine tasks that they don't need to do and the pressure that they're constantly under. And also taking away the unhappy patient that's been on hold for 20 minutes. And that side of things, they should really be looking at how their employee wellness will benefit from the use of AI.
Maybe ask them, how do they feel when they're in a patient mode? Say, wait a minute. Oh, now I know what you're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you all. Looks like those are all the questions that we have right now. Of course, folks joining the call, if you do have questions, please feel free to submit them through the chat, and we will provide answers to those questions as part of the follow-up with the recording and today's deck. Thank you, Joe, John, and Alan. Very insightful conversation today. I really appreciate you providing such great insight. And thanks to all of you in our audience for joining us today. We will send you, as I mentioned, a link to the recording. And don't forget to reach out to us to schedule your 30-minute discovery call so you can get the Nike.com gift card. Thank you all so much for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks again.
That's all.